A Ribbon for Baldy by Stuart. The day Professor Herbert started talking about a project for each member of our general science class, I was more excited than I had ever been. I wanted to have an outstanding project. I wanted to be greater, to be more unusual than those of my classmates. I wanted to do something worthwhile, and something to make them respect me. I'd made the best grade in my class in general science. I'd made more yardage, more tackles, and carried the football across the goal line more times than any other player on my team. But making good grades and playing rugged football hadn't made them forget that I rode a mule to school, that I had worn my mother's shoes the first year, and that I had slipped away at the noon hour so no one would see me eat fat pork between slices of cornbread. Every day I thought about my project for the general science class. We had to have our project by the end of the year, and it was now January. In the classroom, in study hall, and when I did odd jobs on my father's 50 acres, I thought about my project. But it wouldn't come to me like an algebra problem or memorizing a poem. I couldn't think of a project that would help my father and mother to support us, one that would be good and useful. If you set your mind on something and keep on thinking about it, the idea will eventually come, Professor Herbert told us when Bascom Wythe complained about how hard it was to find a project. One morning in February, I left home in a white cloud that had settled over the deep valleys. I could not see an object 10 feet in front of me in this mist. I crossed the pasture into the orchard, and the mist began to thin. When I reached the ridge road, the light, thin air was clear of mist. I looked over the sea of rolling white clouds. The tops of the dark winter hills jutted up like little islands. I have to ride a mule, but not one of my classmates lives in a prettier place, I thought, as I surveyed my world. Look at little Baldy! What a pretty island in the sea of clouds. A thin ribbon of clouds seemed to envelop cone-shaped little Baldy from bottom to top like the new rope Pa had just bought for the windlass over our well. Then, like a flash, the idea for my project came to me. And what an idea it was! I'd not tell anybody about it. I wouldn't even tell my father, but I knew he'd be for it. Little Baldy, wrapped in the white coils of mist, had given me the idea for it. I was so happy I didn't care who laughed at me, what anyone said, or who watched me eat fat meat on cornbread for my lunch. I had an idea, and I knew it was a wonderful one. "I've got something to talk over with you," I told Pa when I got home. "Look over there at that broom sedge and the scattered pines on little Baldy. I'd like to burn the broom sedge and briars and cut the pines and farm that this summer." We stood in our barn lot and looked at little Baldy. "Yes, I've been thinkin' about clearin' that hill up some day," Pa said. "Pa, I'll clear up all this south side, and you clear up the other side," I said. "And I'll plow all of it, and we'll get it in corn this year." "Now this will be some undertakin'," he said. "I can't clear that land up and work 6 days a week on the railroad section. But if you will clear up the south side, I'll hire Bob Lavender to do the other side." "That's a bargain," I said. That night, while the wind was still and the broom sedge and the leaves were dry, my father and I set fire all the way around the base. Next morning, little Baldy was a dark hill, jutting high into February's cold, windy sky. Pa hired Bob Lavender to clear one portion, and I started working on the other. I worked early of mornings, before I went to school. I hurried home and worked into the night. Finn, my 10-year-old brother, was big enough to help me saw down the scattered pines with a crosscut. With a handspike, I started the logs rolling, and they rolled to the base of little Baldy. By middle March, I had my side cleared. Bob Lavender had finished his, too. We burned the brush, and I was ready to start plowing. By April 15th, I had plowed all of little Baldy. My grades in school had fallen off some. Bascom Wythe made the highest mark in general science, and he had always wanted to pass me in the subject. But I let him make the grades. If my father had known what I was up to, he might not have let me do it. But he was going early to work on the railway section, and he never got home until nearly dark. So when I laid little Baldy off to plant him in corn, I started at the bottom and went around and around this high cone-shaped hill like a corkscrew. I was 3 days reaching the top. Then, with a hand planter, I planted the corn on moonlit nights. When I showed my father what I had done, he looked strangely at me. Then he said, "What made you do a thing like this? What's behind all of this?" "I'm going to have the longest corn row in the world," I said. "How long do you think it is, Pa?" "That row is over 20 miles, Pa said, laughing. Finn and I measured the corn row and with a rod pole, and it was 23.5 miles long. When it came time to report on our projects, and I stood up in class and said I had a row of corn on our hill farm 23.5 miles long, everybody laughed. But when I told how I got the idea and how I had worked to accomplish my project, everybody was silent. Professor Herbert and the general science class hiked to my home on a Saturday in early May when the young corn was pretty and green in the long row. 2 newspaper men from a neighboring town came too, and a photographer took pictures of little Baldy and his ribbon of corn. He took pictures of me, of my home and parents, and also of Professor Herbert and my classmates. When the article and pictures were published, a few of my classmates got a little jealous of me, but not one of them ever laughed at me again. And my father and mother were the proudest 2 parents any son could ever hope to have.